This Monday, October 13th, 2025, the world witnessed what many thought would never happen. The hostages taken by Hamas in Gaza were set free, ending 2 years of terror, captivity, and unrelenting prayers. Across Israel, the sound of celebration rose from the streets. Families ran to the arms of loved ones they had not seen since that dark October morning 2 years ago. It was a day that shook the heavens and the earth, a day that marked the fulfillment of countless prayers, and a day that carried the unmistakable fingerprints of God. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, and all the citizens of Israel and of the world who have prayed and wept and waited, this is a day of profound joy, a day of renewed faith, a day to give our deepest thanks to the Almighty, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The guns are silent, the skies are calm, and the Holy Land breathes once again. After 2 years of warfare and pain, a ceasefire has come into effect, and for the first time in years, the morning sun rose over Jerusalem in peace. 20 hostages have returned alive, delivered from the valley of the shadow of death. 28 more who perished in captivity have been brought home to rest in the sacred soil of Israel. Their suffering ended, their memory eternal. And yet behind this event lies a mystery, an ancient mystery that reaches back thousands of years to the days of Moses and the giving of the appointed times of God. Could it be that even this moment, even this liberation was written into the calendar of heaven long before any of us were born? Could it be that the hand of the Almighty ordained that this day would come, and that the nations, leaders, and people involved were unknowingly guided to fulfill a divine script written before the foundation of the world? To understand this thing, we must go back to the sands of Sinai. There, more than 3,000 years ago, God gave Moses the revelation of his appointed times, the feasts of the Lord. He wrote down the seasons of his covenant, the sacred calendar that would mark his dealings with his people through history. Among those appointed times was one feast above all, a feast of joy and dwelling in the presence of God, a feast known as Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. It comes in the autumn at the end of the harvest, and it is called the Feast of Completion. It celebrates the provision of God, the gathering in of the fruit of the earth, and the joy of dwelling under his shelter. It is the feast of rejoicing, the feast of completion, the feast of dwelling. But the enemy of God, the one called the serpent, the dragon, Hasatan, wars against all that is holy. From the beginning, he has warred against God's people, against Israel, and against all who bear the name of the Lord. It was no coincidence that on October 7th, 2023, when Hamas invaded Israel, massacring civilians and taking hostages, that day on the Hebrew calendar was also an appointed time of God. It was the culmination of the Feast of Tabernacles. The enemy took a day of celebration, of joy, of dwelling in God's presence, and turned it into a day of horror and bloodshed. The music festival that was attacked that morning was called the Nova Sukkot Festival, literally the Festival of Tabernacles. The enemy took what was meant for joy and twisted it into mourning. For 2 years, Israel wept. For 2 years, prayers ascended from synagogues, from churches, from living rooms and hospitals, from parents crying in the night for their children, from hostages praying in dark tunnels beneath Gaza. And then on Monday, October 13th, 2025, the captivity came to its end. But what was that a day on God's calendar? On the Hebrew calendar, October 13th, 2025 was the 21st day of the month of Tishri. And what is the 21st of Tishri? It is the final day of the Feast of Tabernacles. It is called Hoshana Rabbah, the great day of salvation. Hoshana Rabbah is the last and greatest day of the feast. It is the day of completion. It is mentioned in the Gospel of John chapter 7, where it says, on the last and greatest day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink." It was on this very day, the day of Hoshana Rabbah, that Yeshua Jesus declared himself the source of living water, the Savior, the answer to the cry of his people. The word Hoshana means, Lord, save us. And on Hoshana Rabbah, the people cry out, "Save us, Lord, bring us deliverance." For 2 years, Israel cried out, "Lord, save us, save our people, save our hostages." For 2 years, families prayed for deliverance. And on this very day, the day of salvation, God answered. On Hoshana Rabbah, the day whose very name means the great salvation, the hostages were saved and brought home. What began on a holy day of desecration ended on a holy day of deliverance. The same God who commanded the feast brought it to fulfillment in our time. Hoshana Rabbah is known as the day of completion. It is the 7th day of the 7-day feast in the 7th month of the sacred calendar. 7 is the number of completion. On the 7th day of the 7th feast in the 7th month, God completed the deliverance of His people. What began in darkness was completed in light. The circle was closed. The prayers were answered. The captivity came to its completion. But there is more. In ancient times, on Hoshana Rabbah, the priests would make 7 processions around the altar, and when the 7th procession was done, the trumpets would sound. The trumpet marked the completion of the feast and the proclamation of God's deliverance. The trumpet would sound in Jerusalem on Hoshana Rabbah, and this year, on that same day, in the halls of the Knesset, the trumpet sounded again. The trump sounded. The former President of the United States, Donald Trump, was in Jerusalem that day speaking words of thanksgiving to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It was not planned by human hands, but by divine orchestration. The trump sounded in Jerusalem on Hoshana Rabbah, the day of salvation. In the ancient calendar of God, Hoshana Rabbah was also known as a day of judgment. It is said that on this day, God seals the judgments of the year. In 1946, the leaders of Nazi Germany were executed on this very day, Hoshana Rabbah, the day of divine judgment. And now on October 13, 2025, Hoshana Rabbah once again became a day of justice when God restored Israel's joy and answered her enemies with righteousness. When the sun set on October 13th, it became the next Hebrew day, the 22nd of Tisri, known as Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly. It is the day that closes the cycle of the feasts, the day that seals the sacred year. On the Hebrew calendar, the number 8 represents new beginnings. And so as the captivity ended, a new beginning dawned. It is the day of completion turning into the day of new creation. When Hamas first attacked on October 7th, 2023, that day too fell on Shemini Atzeret. It began on a holy day, and now, exactly 2 years later, it ends on the same holy day. The story that began on a day of desecration has come full circle to the same day, now a day of restoration. What the enemy meant for evil, God has turned for good. 2 years ago, on the day of Israel's joy, the enemy struck to take away joy. Now, on the same day, God restored it. The same feast that began in mourning has ended in rejoicing. This is the pattern of God. This is the mystery of redemption. What begins in loss ends in gain. What begins in darkness ends in light. What begins with the cross ends with resurrection. And it was on this same day, Hoshana Rabbah, 2,000 years ago, that Yeshua Jesus stood in the temple and cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink." It was the day of salvation. It was the day of deliverance. It was the day when the Messiah offered the living waters of redemption. And now on that same appointed day, the God of Israel once again brought deliverance and restoration to His people. Everything that happened, the invasion, the captivity, the prayers, and the release was written into the appointed times of God. The beginning and the end were both holy days. The captivity began on Shemini Atzeret and it ended on Shemini Atzeret. The circle of time was sealed. The same God who ordained the feasts in the wilderness has revealed His sovereignty again in our day. This is not coincidence. This is providence. Behind the headlines, behind the politics, behind the battles, there is a hand guiding history, the hand of the Almighty. The God of Abraham still writes the story of nations. The God of Israel still fulfills His word. The God of redemption still turns mourning into joy. And this is not only Israel's story, it is a message for every life. The same God who brought completion to Israel's captivity can bring completion to your struggles. The same God who restored joy to His people can restore your joy. The enemy has tried to take from you the blessings God intended, the joy, the peace, the calling on your life, but God has the power to redeem and restore. He can turn the very day of your sorrow into the day of your rejoicing. Maybe the enemy has taken from you your hope, your peace, your relationships, your purpose. But God says, "I know the plans I have for you, plans for good and not for evil, plans to give you a future and a hope." What the enemy has meant for harm, God will use for good. Just as Israel's captivity ended on the day of completion, God can bring your battles, your pain, and your trials to their appointed completion. The circle of your life is not random. The same hand that wrote the calendar of the universe writes the days of your destiny. And just as He restored the captives, He can restore you. There is a Hoshana Rabbah for your life, a day of great salvation, a day when the Lord saves, a day of completion. There is a Shemini Atzeret for you, a new beginning, a new creation, a new season of joy. The story of Israel is a sign to the world. The same God who parted the Red Sea, who brought His people home from exile, who raised the dead, is still moving. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His plans cannot be thwarted. and his promises cannot fail. And as the hostages returned, the world saw a glimpse of that eternal promise, the promise of ultimate redemption. It is written that the Messiah will one day come again, that he will stand on the Mount of Olives, that he will bring peace to Jerusalem and to the world. All history is moving toward that moment. The events of these days are the foreshadowing of that final redemption. For 2 years, the enemy tried to break Israel. But the people prayed, the faithful stood, and God moved. The enemy began it on a holy day. God ended it on the same holy day. The enemy took the day of joy. God gave it back. The enemy took captives. God set them free. The enemy sowed mourning. God brought rejoicing. And so it is with every life that turns to Him. The enemy may have written one story, but God will always write the last chapter. The trumpet will sound. The Lord will save. The cycle will close and joy will come again. And if you are thirsty, as Yeshua said on this very feast, come to Him. Come to the source of living water. Come to the one who turns captivity into freedom, mourning into dancing, and sorrow into joy. He is the same God who moved for Israel, and He can move for you. What happened this week in Israel was not an accident. It was appointed, it was ordained. It was the revelation of a divine mystery that began on Mount Sinai and reaches to this very moment. The Feast of Tabernacles, the day of salvation, the day of completion, the day of new beginnings, all converged in one prophetic hour. The same God who wrote the story of Israel has written the story of your life. He calls to you today as He called to His people 2,000 years ago. If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. This is your Hoshana Rabbah. This is your day of salvation. The captivity is over. The joy is restored. The trumpet has sounded. And the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is still moving, still fulfilling, still redeeming. What began in sorrow will end in joy. What began in darkness will end in light. The same God who delivered Israel will deliver you. For the story of Israel is the story of redemption. The feasts are the calendar of His mercy. The cycles of time are the fingerprints of His plan. And all of it leads to the final Hoshana Rabbah, when Messiah returns and all the earth will cry out, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Until that day, may we stand watch and believe. For the God who completed His work in Israel will complete His work in you. The same God who brought home the captives will bring home your heart. The same God who restored joy to Zion will restore joy to your life. The trumpet has sounded in Jerusalem, and heaven has declared, "The Lord reigns." The captivity is over. The story is not over. God is not finished, and His purposes, ancient, eternal, and unstoppable, will come to pass.